Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Imagine two ex-politicians, a former president and vice president, and add in a murder mystery. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Those are the ingredients of a new novel entitled Hope Never Dies. And yes, there's that word hope, as in hope and change. On the front cover is former President Barack Obama pointing the way forward as former Vice President Joe Biden sits behind the wheel of a car. It's a fanciful work of fiction that takes place in Biden's old stomping grounds of Wilmington. We have with us the author, Andrew Shaffer. He's also a New York Times best-selling writer. Welcome to the program.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Don.
So, first of all, what was the inspiration for this book?
Well, the inspiration, of course, is just Joe Biden. The first time I saw him in his Ray-Ban aviator shades, I thought, that guy looks like a stereotypical Hollywood action hero, or he could be on the cover of a noir novel. And then, of course, he opens his mouth, and you go, well, maybe not. But over the years, I sort of toyed with that idea, and then before finally settling on doing sort of a bromance story between him and Barack Obama, because I figured that was actually the missing piece there. So Joe was always sort of the Watson, while Barack Obama is the Sherlock.
So how did you come up with or embellish Biden's character? I mean, he is, of course, telling the story of the mystery itself. So you get really sort of this insight into this. It almost seems like a certain chaotic quality to his mind.
Yeah, there is sort of a chaotic quality in the book to his mind. I think in real life, obviously, I don't know what he thinks, but I've read all of his books. I've listened to his speeches, been following him for years, and he's a very thoughtful, deep, intelligent guy, which is kind of at odds with some of the public perception of him that people had while he was vice president, which was always just this guy that occasionally sticks his foot in his mouth or something, And I was like, no, he's actually much deeper than that. So while I was writing the book, the character of Joe Biden, which again, it's a fictionalized version of him, but it just became, much deeper. So there's a little bit of silliness there still, especially between the banter between him and Obama. But I wanted to sort of bring out parts of his character that maybe you don't see, in the everyday life there, in the public perception.
Because, for instance, he almost seems a bit klutzy in some ways. Obviously, he gets injured. He buys lilies when he shouldn't buy them. There's a constant reminder, obviously, of his age all the time. You mentioned the Ray-Bans, and even some quirky phrases that he has. Where did you get that from?
Well, I don't think that, again, any of that was really necessarily from his personal life or anything, but I was just kind of toying with that public perception of him, and it was something I just had a lot of fun doing, and so it kept sort of being stretched and exaggerated and just throwing in just really bad sort of, I guess, what we call dad jokes. So when he orders a ice cream, he says, "I'll take pie a la mode, hold the pie." So, so it really sort of exaggerates that public perception of what Joe Biden is.
So describe how you envisioned the former President Obama. Obviously, we're not getting a sense of what's going on inside his mind, but how did you decide to portray him? Because he seems very, very cool, as it were.
Oh, of course. I tried to write the book actually in dueling point of views first, where it was Biden for one chapter and then Obama for another, but it just didn't work because you really can't get into Barack Obama's head. He works best as a character, at least, as someone who is that Sherlock Holmes, where you don't know what's going on up there, and you don't really want to. I think it just reminds me sort of like the Pirates of the Caribbean movie franchise, where Jack Sparrow was really compelling and enigmatic as a supporting character, but then when he took on sort of a starring role and you got inside his head and you knew all the stuff about him, you're like, that's not as interesting as I thought. So I thought, there's just this idea that that the more mysterious that I could leave Barack Obama, the better off the book would be.
There are just to strike me, by the way, towards the second, I guess the second half of the book, I think it is. There is a certain toughness about Obama in terms of physical attack, as it were, on some of the other characters in the book.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I thought that I kind of went back and forth on that because, he's such such a nonviolent personality, and he is a very peaceful, calm guy. But I thought there was a sense that, hey, this is a work of fiction, and we really want to see this character, break loose here. And it's really built up like 8 years of him fighting, back against Congress and everything that he went through as president, and to come out on the other end, how it all shook out. I just felt there was a sense that he really has to sort of cut loose here, and so it doesn't get extremely violent, but there is a toughness to him that I think is more wish fulfillment on my part, and what some people kind of want to see out of him, versus the real Barack Obama obviously would not do these things, I don't think.
So the relationship between the two, you begin the book with their relationship essentially being estranged.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about the book was that, Barack Obama is going around the world after he's done being president, and he's going snorkeling, fly fishing, whatever, hang gliding. He's hanging out with all these people like Justin Trudeau, and in the book I have him hang out with Bradley Cooper as well. But he's going around doing this. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is sitting at home working on basically nothing. He's like, what do I do next? What comes next for Joe Biden? And he's watching Barack Obama go around basically looking for a new best friend, almost, is what Joe Biden thinks in his mind. Now, in real life, did that happen? I don't believe so. But, it's kind of that's kind of what we all wanted to see. We all wanted that bond to be so strong that they had in office, that if you see, your best friend that you had lunch with every day for 8 years, you want to see him kind of sad when he's not included anymore in that person's life.
So set up the novel for us, because it involves the death of a train engineer.
Yeah, so the book starts off with the death of a train conductor, and who's been a longtime friend of Joe Biden's, and Obama has some information about this, and he comes to see him in the middle of the night. It's very mysterious circumstances, and says, well, what we did was we actually found a map on this guy, and police are calling it an accident, but there was a map to your house, Joe. We found your address and stuff on him. So there's a mystery that's set up at the beginning, and by the midway point of the book, you realize that the mystery, of course, is much deeper than that. But it's not a story about political corruption that goes to the highest levels of government or anything. They're definitely dealing with a very down to earth sort of mystery here. So it's very much like a noir novel in that sense.
And his relationship with Biden's relationship with this conductor is, he sees these people every day, but there's a question about how much he really knows about them, because Biden is sort of this man of the people that we get this image of.
Right, and I think that was something that was sort of fun to play around with, because Joe Biden, he's the man of the people, but then for 8 years he was in Washington, and even when he went back, he couldn't use the Amtrak anymore because of all of his Secret Service entourage and everything. So, so he hasn't really been a man of the people for his people in Delaware for a long time, and he has sort of this this worry that he's like, are they going to forget me? How well did I really know people? Was this all just politics? Or, so he struggles with these questions over the course of the book.
So, and also another interesting character along that train of thought is that you have the character who's called the mayor, which is actually the mayor of Wilmington Station. Describe for me him, how you came up with his character, and how he relates to Biden.
Well, it's really interesting. I needed a character that could sort of feed information to Joe Biden, and I also wanted Joe Biden to talk to people from all walks of life. So he's not just going to talk to the Amtrak conductors and engineers and everyone. He's also going to talk to, the guy that shines his shoes. And here's a guy who shines his shoes for 20, 30 years. So it's someone, again, that he knows on some level, but, how well does he really know this person? So it was a really fun thing to sort of play around with, but yeah, it would just sort of came naturally into the story that Joe would be familiar with people from all walks of life.
Another almost character in the book is the Beast, which of course is the car that Obama drives or has driven for him by his Secret Service guy Steve. Tell us a little bit about the car and how it does seem to have a life of its own.
Oh yeah, while they were in office, the President Obama had this luxury armored sort of SUV limo type thing called the Beast, and it's it was armor plated and all this kind of great stuff to it. And the only thing it didn't have was like a flamethrower shooting fire out of it. But that was sort of the car that he was driven around in. And so when I had him go into his private life here, I had him actually buy a very similar car to that. Just a big hulking black SUV, and it's not the most inconspicuous car. But it turns out you learn a little bit later on in the book, spoiler, that it's actually Michelle's car and he's just borrowing it. He was just kind of trying to show off for Joe at the time. Like, look at this car that I got.
So, and then we have some cops involved. Describe for me that kind of how you came up with that.
Well, I wanted to have, again, sort of someone that Joe might have known from his old life. The real Joe Biden has a very great relationship with law enforcement, in fact. And so I wanted to sort of show that in the book by having one detective that he used to know in Wilmington, but then also have another character who had recently moved to Delaware and was like, you're the vice president. I've never seen you around here that much. I'm not going to treat you any different than anyone else. And so there's kind of this combative sort of tone that she takes with him. And then, Joe, who's used to just getting along with everyone, really doesn't understand it. So at one point I have him joke. He's, Obama says, "Well, what's her problem with you?" And he goes, "Oh, she's a Republican." But it's clearly a joke because Joe has gotten along with a lot of Republicans. So again, that plays into the idea that can Joe go home again? What's that like? And obviously in real life, it's not been a problem. But in the book, we sort of play up those sort of divisions.
You also have another sort of inanimate character is Wilmington itself, and not necessarily the most pleasant part of Wilmington.
Yeah. Wilmington in the book was really a stand-in for almost America because it's such an American city in the fact that you have a strong middle class, but you also have a lot of poverty to deal with, and there's definitely an upper class there, and a lot of obviously a lot of corporations and stuff that are housed there. So you just have this really weird mix of different sort of social stratas and stuff, and that's how America is really. So I didn't want to shy away from that, and I wanted to really get Joe sort of out of his element. Now it turns out that Joe has spent a lot of time out of his element over the years, but for when you're writing a noir novel or a crime novel, you really have to get them to those poor areas and stuff where they kind of stick out, and and kind of not only just show Joe what's happening in his own city, but also show the reader what's happening here and what's happening in the rest of the country.
I sometimes got the sense that Joe had been away for so long that his familiarity with the city was somewhat a little more distant than perhaps it might have been.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in real life, he'd been coming back quite frequently, but I mean, that's the knock against all presidents and vice presidents. Oh, how often are they going home? Look how much this is costing taxpayers. And I know that was one thing with Joe Biden that people sort of harped on, but that's always the case. So in real life, yeah, he was back frequently, and he would have known if his favorite restaurant had closed down or whatnot. So, but in the book, we kind of play up that idea that it's really this is a homecoming, and hey guys, I'm home. I'm not in Washington anymore, and he kind of feels that people have moved on from him.
You also feature a motorcycle club. Did you pattern that after any particular group, or what? How did you come up with them?
No, I didn't pattern it after any particular group, but it was based on actually, some real life sort of news stories that I'd read about motorcycle clubs transporting like opioids and other drugs and stuff, and I watched a couple episodes of Sons of Anarchy, which is as good of research as you can do, I think.
So, in terms of these two characters, Obama and Biden, every once in a while you do tend to drop in some things that may be a little more philosophical, even as they are relating to the murder itself. Actually, there are two murders, including the engineer. And Obama at one point says that things have been so easy so far. They're not going to stay that way. The path to victory isn't a straight one. There are going to be ups and downs, twists and turns. That sounds a lot like the novel itself.
Yeah. What's interesting about those quotes is a lot of those types of quotes were actually like real or twists on Barack Obama quotes. And stuff that Obama or Biden had said during like the 2008 and 2012 campaigns. So I really wanted to sort of echo those campaigns and what people found the most inspiring. What was the most inspiring about Obama was the hope and change that he promised to bring. And once he got in office, he sort of went up against, the political machinery and the Washington swamp and all that, and what every other, president goes up against. And he really, I think people sort of lost a little bit of faith at that point. And so what I wanted to do was sort of bring us back to, a little bit more philosophical, almost, not self-help, but sort of motivational speaking there. That I don't think that he walks around talking in sound bites, but it sure would be great one day.
And it's almost. I think you sum it up as sort of this wishful idealism.
Oh yeah. It's and for someone who had a lot of idealism and optimism, both Obama and Biden, and to for them to sit around right now, it has to be very painful to watch a lot of the things that they had built up, be taken apart and dismantled, and so it was very interesting. But I really wanted, that was one of the things I definitely wanted to do with the book, was sort of say, hey, I know these guys aren't going to be out there front and center all the time, but remember the message that they had for us. And, who knows? They could be front and center this fall again. You don't know.
Because then the other quote that I looked from, it was actually from the Biden character, talking, and it really sort of implies that the loss, as it were, of the momentum after 8 years. And Biden says, forget about 2008 and 2012 and 2016. Forget about everything that we did and everything we didn't do. Forget about our successes and our failures. Focus on this one thing right here. This is it. This is our chance to make a difference, a real difference, end quote. Does that sum up, do you think, where they are?
I mean, in the book it sums up.
Right, exactly, yeah.
I think in real life it also does sum up where they are. Well, at least where Barack Obama's at with his recent. He's given a couple of private speeches recently where he said pretty much, this isn't about. I'm not up here. I'm not going to talk about nostalgia. This is about right here. This is about 2018. It's not about 2020. This is about right now, and you need to register. You need to get out there and vote. And so there was a little bit of that in the book as well.
Along those philosophical lines, there's this Abby Todd, who she's a sort of an insurance investigator, and there's one final scene where she's talking to Biden and so on, and she talks, whatever she does, she says it's about seeking justice, seeking the truth. How important was that to you?
It's very important because, she says it's about seeking the truth, and for a while in the book, the Biden character kind of confuses the truth with maybe sort of revenge almost, and or it doesn't matter what we do to get the right, the bad guy, as long as we get them. And she's saying, do you want to hear, the truth about what really happened? That's really what justice is the truth. Justice isn't about, getting revenge or anything. It's not about punishing someone. Justice is about getting the truth out there.
So, did you ever anticipate the idea of writing this book? Was this a long-term sort of thought process? It seemed to indicate that there was something to that.
Yeah. Like I said, in the initial sort of stages, the idea was 4 or 5 years ago, but I sort of set it down until those bromance memes really took off during their last month in office or so, and that's when I really stepped things up, wrote a sample, sent it to my agent, and then we got a publisher on board. But there wasn't much interest in this type of book ahead of that time because, like I said, people had soured a little bit on Obama and Biden just simply because things didn't pan out 100%. And now those same people a month later were just like, please come back to us. We don't know what we had.
So what would you say to a Trump supporter who's thinking about reading this book? And what does this say to someone who may have voted for Donald Trump, who seems to be, in many ways, the antithesis of the administration, certainly in terms of policy and perhaps even in tone?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I have had some people read it of a different, let's say, political persuasion than myself or Obama and Biden, and they haven't been completely offended because the book doesn't lean too heavily on politics. It's really a story about two characters that and obviously a lot of your enjoyment of the story will depend on how much you like those characters. But also I think it really tries to humanize them. And so I would, the goal really with all writing is really to form some sort of empathy, with the reader, and to invite them into this world and show them something they don't know. So I would definitely encourage people who aren't, already fans of Obama and Biden to pick it up if they're curious. Because all I'll say is that the few people that have read it that aren't fans have walked away saying, that wasn't as bad as I thought.
By the way,
I said, well, it didn't offend you? Oh, no, it was a good mystery. And I'm like, how?
By the way, I take it that neither Biden nor Obama have read the book or any reaction from anybody around him, or.
I'm not sure. I did have one person who was a previous staffer of his check out the book and enjoy it. Again, it would be really weird to read what is basically fan fiction of yourself. I would imagine that would be kind of strange. So I don't imagine either of them to pick it up, but I'm sure they'll both be aware of it in some way.
Perhaps Joe will read it.
Yeah,
his spare time, right?
Perhaps Jill or Michelle will read it for them.
Well, we've been speaking with Andrew Shaffer. He is a New York Times bestselling writer and author of a new book called Hope Never Dies, which includes both former President Barack Obama and former Vice President Joe Biden and a murder mystery. And we appreciate you taking the time to chat with us this morning.
Oh, thanks so much, Don. I appreciate it.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.